two personalities that attracted the same respect was the Queen and Nelson Mandela. You know, when they were there, you did not exist.
The prince, without missing a beat, leaned forward, and I'm in earshot, and he said, now, whatever you do, don't go into media. Look what happened to your father.
And I think it is incredibly remarkable that the Queen should have ended her life in Scotland at her beloved Balmoral, because this has created a real sense of unity in the United Kingdom around this death that otherwise there often isn't.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Marissa Lennox.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Marissa Lennox.
And I'm Libby Znaimer. She was not a queen, she was the queen, and most of us cannot remember a time when she was not on the throne. Her death brings to an end a long and distinguished reign spanning 7 decades of immense change.
She embodied service and duty and was a constant, unchanging presence in the background to our lives. On today's show, we'll reflect on her remarkable life and legacy with people who knew her personally,
including former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, who joins us next. But before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
In 1952, Queen Elizabeth II ascended the throne. By 2015, she'd earned the distinction of longest reigning British monarch, surpassing Queen Victoria's of 63 years, 7 months, and 2 days. During her reign, she worked with 12 Canadian prime ministers, 14 U.S. presidents, and 7 popes. From visiting more than 120 different countries to giving royal assent to more than 3,500 acts of parliament, her successes were endless. But above all, that the Commonwealth stands ever taller, growing from just 8 members to 54 today, has been the Queen's crowning achievement.
12 prime ministers served at the pleasure of the Queen. Justin Trudeau has known her his entire life and will be attending her funeral.
Jean Chrétien knew her for more than 50 years and forged a personal relationship. Here is part 1 of my interview with the former Prime Minister. We begin with former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Monsieur Chrétien, thank you so much for taking the time.
All right, I'm happy to be with you this morning.
You knew the Queen for more than 50 years, and in addition to dealing with her as your monarch, she was your friend. What are your feelings now and your thoughts?
Oh, I'm very sad, but I'm not the only one. There's millions and millions of people around the globe who are sad today because she was a superb monarch, and you know, she was respected by everybody, and she's done a fantastic job. And Call of Duty was there 24 hours a day, all her life.
You first met her when you were a junior minister in 1967, and then you took her, you and your wife, Aline, took her on a trip to the north with her husband in 1970. Please tell us about that.
But in 1970, it was a centennial of the Northwest Territory. And Aline and I, we were the hosts of the Queen, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, and Princess Anne. And we traveled from one Eskimo village to another one for 4 days. And we started in Frobisher Bay, that is Iqaluit today. And we terminated in Fort Providence in the southwest of the Northwest Territory. So we went from the northeast to the southwest of the north. It was a very exciting period, for me and for Aline. We were quite young. We were a bit surprised to be the host of the royal family for 4 days. And of course, I was in one plane with the Queen and Prince Philip, the twin otter. But as the Prince Charles was had to be in a different plane, and it was with Princess Anne and my wife Aline. So we traveled that way for 4 days. And at noon and at night, we were stopping in different places to have some meeting with the local citizens.
You traveled in small planes. Was she game for the things that were less than 5 stars?
Oh, then she was enjoying it quite a lot. Prince Philip enjoyed very much to be sitting with her, taking the seat of one of the co-pilot because he was a pilot and he was quite excited to fly in the north. And I would sit with the Queen, and she had a air marshal with her who was speaking good French. So she used 4 days to practice her French with me.
There's a wonderful story from the signing of the Constitution in 1982 that involves you and a pen and the Queen. Please tell us about that.
But it was a signing of the new Constitution, and the Queen signed first, Trudeau signed the second, I was to sign the third. And when I sat down, took the pen, and Trudeau had broken the tip of the pen. So when I took the pen, I tried to sign my name on this very important document, and it was not working. So I said something, and you can see in the picture, the Queen looked to her left, to her right, and Burton laughing. And I had said something, and the press was asking me, what did you say? I said, I cannot tell you, it's a state secret. But in reality, I had used the word merde. And she was perfectly bilingual. She understood very well what I meant. And, when she was having a burst of laugh. So I took the other pen and did finish the signing. But it was a broadcast for a long time. And, I have many, many stories. One time she had seen me 5 times in a year and a half. So she did not expect me to be there. When she saw me, she said again. And I said, Your Majesty, I am the royalist from Quebec. It was not in a way a great compliment. I am. But, we had, extremely good personal relation.
And she always spoke to you en français?
Not all the time, but most of the time. And the last time I briefed her for the patriation of the Constitution, it was that last law that Great Britain was to pass on Canada. So I met her privately, to brief her, and I said it would be important for me if I could brief you in French. She said, pourquoi pas, Monsieur le Ministre? And I kept the discussion in French. And she was very, she was speaking very good French, and her mother even more, because her mother, she told me and told Aline that she has spoken French only French until she was 5. And that because probably she has a French nanny. So when the Queen Mother will always rush to us to practice her French.
Part 2 of my interview with the former Prime Minister is coming up later in the show, but next we'll bring in our panel for their reflections on the life and legacy of Queen Elizabeth II.
That's coming up after the break.
Welcome back to this special edition of theZoomer on the life and legacy of Queen Elizabeth II and the future of the British monarchy.
We have an all-star panel lined up for you today. Dr. Carolyn Harris, Richard Berthelsen, and Nathan Tidridge. It's good to have you all on the program to reflect on such a profound moment in history. And so, Richard, something that struck me was sort of the deep outpouring of emotional support from people from every corner of the globe. I mean, even the news coverage and reactions from past and present world leaders, even Vladimir Putin said something about the Queen. It was really stunning to see. And so I guess let's start there. What is it about this Queen that elicited such an outpouring?
Well, this is a global monarch. I mean, let's consider the position of her role as head of the Commonwealth over 55 nations. The fact that she, at the present, is queen of 15 nations, and she was queen of many, many more of those members of the Commonwealth at different points in her reign. So she has a direct relationship, having been head of state of many countries. And of course, the British monarchy has always played an outsized role on the world stage. It's really a critical part of the brand of the United Kingdom. And so, the Queen has traveled extensively, and over the course of 70 years, you have touched base with a lot of people, and there are memories and there are places in so many countries around the world that have a direct association with the Queen. So everyone feels that they know her, everyone feels they have a part of her, and there's a legacy of her involvement in so many places on the globe.
Dr. Harris, I'm fascinated by the extent of the pomp and the circumstance and the uniforms and the ceremonies. What role do they play, and did they evolve over time?
Yes, these ceremonies evolved over time. While the coronation service is more than 1,000 years old, a lot of the traditions associated with royal weddings, funerals, christenings date back to the reign of Queen Victoria. So her remains were carried on a gun carriage. And then we see in the 20th century a lot of the commemorative events associated with remembering those who had perished in the First World War and the Second World War had an impact on the ceremonial for the funerals of King George V, the late Queen's grandfather, who was king during the First World War, and George VI, the late Queen's father, who was king during the Second World War. So Remembrance Day ceremonies, the development of a military ceremonial from the 19th century forward, all of this is informing the ceremonies that we will be seeing in the coming week.
It is really fascinating to watch. Nathan, as we reflect on the past, we also look to the future with King Charles III. Now, the Queen, she was politically neutral for 70 years. Even during the EU referendum, she stayed above the fray, and it was how she maintained such a good relationship with politicians on different sides of the political coin. But, the king has never shied away from sharing his political views. And in the past, he's been very outspoken about the environment and about organic farming. And so what does that look like for a monarch that's supposed to supersede the individual?
No, upon his ascension, in his first address, the king reiterated that the position of a constitutional monarch is to be politically neutral, and he agreed that that's the role that he would play. He said that quite throughout his time as Prince of Wales. So when you're Prince of Wales, that role has really evolved over time, really under his headship, because he was Prince of Wales for so long, the longest, to be attached to, the different passions of the Prince of Wales. Here in Canada, we see that with the Prince's Trust. But as sovereign, that's a completely different role. And Charles himself knows that. He has been watching his mother for a very, very long time, and seems to be committed to upholding her legacy as really the benchmark of a constitutional monarch.
Richard, are you surprised by the size of the crowd, even in areas where the monarchy is not necessarily that popular, like in Scotland?
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. And I think we have to distinguish, people have different reasons for showing up to grand state events. Some people, recognize this as a moment of history, whether or not they're monarchists, whether or not they agree with being a monarchy. And I think there's a lot of people who are showing up out of personal loyalty and respect for Queen Elizabeth II. There are obviously people who are deeply loyal to the institution, who are going to be there one way or another. And even in Scotland, while there is difficulty in the relationship between England and Scotland, and between Scotland's position within the United Kingdom, the royal family has always had a deep relationship with Scotland. I mean, after all, the Queen is the daughter of a Scottish person, and the royal family have thrown themselves into life in Scotland. And I think it is incredibly remarkable that the Queen should have ended her life in Scotland at her beloved Balmoral, because this has created a real sense of unity in the United Kingdom around this death that otherwise there often isn't. And it really has, in her way, has done the final moment of service to a united kingdom.
It's so true. All right, we need to take a quick break. David Onley, who served as the Queen's representative from 2007 to 2014, joins us next to share his memories of working with the Queen.
Marissa will have a one-on-one interview after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. Marissa sat down with the Honourable David Onley, former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario.
He shared his personal experiences with the Queen and also King Charles III. Take a look. Mr. Onley, thank you for taking the time today.
It's a pleasure.
How did you first receive the news of Queen Elizabeth's passing? As her representative here in Canada and in Ontario, how did that news hit you as someone who knew her personally?
Well, initially, and still, excuse me, it's a certain degree of sadness, but then that's quickly replaced by a recognition of her accomplishments. And so it's very much a bittersweet moment. And I think many Canadians are experiencing that same feeling of bittersweet. I mean, to live to 96 and to be able to continue your official duties up to 48 hours before passing away, that's really a tremendous accomplishment. And it's a real indication of her dedication to the office, which she had carried off for 70 years, the longest reigning monarch in British history.
Now, one thing I do keep hearing about is how extraordinarily difficult her job was. Even compared to other world leaders, the nature of her job was so extremely demanding. Do you have any insight into that?
Well, yes, to the extent that, we all of us kind of long for the weekend, whenever that might be, or, as you well know in the media, whichever 2 days of the week that you can get off. With the Queen, there were no days off. It was just an ongoing job. It's just that her duties moved from location to location. And yet she just embraced it with this phenomenal stamina. And I would say that stamina came from the love of the position. If you love what you're doing, this my late father used to say, if you love what you're doing, you're really never at work. And I think that was one of the keys that she had as just part of her DNA, which takes us back to that speech that she gave in 1947 as Princess Elizabeth, knowing full well that at some point she would be queen. And she said, and I'm not quoting exactly, but she said, whether my life be short or be long, it will be to exercise my responsibilities to you all. And, it's like she had maybe a foreshadowing that her reign would not be short, but that it would be long, and has now been characterized as the end of the second Elizabethan era.
So let's talk a little bit then about the change that the Queen's death represents. She's all a majority of Canadians have ever known. She's all I've ever known. How do you read the kind of impact that this will produce?
Well, I think it's twofold. In one part, that for Charles, it's going to be a very hard act to follow, if I can put it in slightly coarse terminology. But, where he's going to, now that he's king, I think he's got a good basis to create his own stamp of authority and character and personality in the office. And I feel very strongly, having met him a number of times, quite frankly, that with his sense of humor, which is really quite something, and his outlook on life, and his persistence in promoting things well ahead of political processes. For instance, he's been talking about the environment long before any politician broached the subject. He has promoted ideas relating to farming and taking care of nature, if you will. And as I mentioned, this great sense of humor. If we have time, I've got a very brief story to mention about the sense of humor. That's when he came to Queen's Park, along with Camilla, now the Queen Consort, and he was meeting a number of people. And as it turned out, I did kind of pull rank on this one. My middle son, who was a law student at that point, had two of his buddies from the University of Windsor Law School, and my youngest son, Michael, who was not a lawyer. In fact, he hadn't even finished undergraduate at that point, but he came and I introduced them. And then he looked at Michael, who looked younger than the other three, and the prince said, "Now, who are you? Where are you in the ranking of things? And are you a lawyer?" And he said, "No, Your Majesty, I'm a media and communication student at the University of Brock." And the prince, without missing a beat, leaned forward, and I'm in earshot. And he said, "Now, whatever you do, don't go into media. Look what happened to your father." So it was one of the great lines.
You know, I like to hear stories like that because it sort of gives a personal face to these people that are almost mythical. They're like celebrities to us. Now Mr. Onley, it's the perennial debate here in Canada whether or not we will abolish the monarchy. And under the Queen, it was never likely to happen because she was so beloved. But what does that look like under King Charles III?
I would quote for you the remarks given in a private meeting by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper when the Lieutenant Governors met for a session at Rideau Hall with the Governor General of the day, David Johnston, when he said, in answer to that almost very same question, and he said, "Well, people think I'm much more of a monarchist than I actually am, but I'm a student of politics. And the reality is the process to change the Constitution is so complicated and so difficult, including," and now I'm saying my own words, "receiving unanimous approval, not only of the House of Commons, but all 10 provinces. That's what it would take to change the Constitution." And then the former Prime Minister shrugged his shoulders and said, "Politically, that's just not going to happen. So it's far better to look at the deficiencies and try to correct them." And with that, I certainly agree with them 100%. It's my perception, given the times that I've met with former Prince Charles, now King Charles III, that he's going to grow on people. It won't be the same as the Queen, but he's had a lifetime to get ready for this position. And I think in a very short order, he's going to execute that position and do so with a very high degree of aplomb.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, the Honourable David Onley, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Stay with us. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. Don't go away.
Welcome back. We're all still getting used to the title King Charles III. In some cases, it's a change in name only. In others, it will be more profound. Many of us associate the Queen's image with the head side of our coins and our $20 bill.
With her passing, the question arises when and if our currency will change. Any legal documents issued in the name of the Queen are now understood to be from the King. And oaths of allegiance, like those required to become a citizen or a member of the armed forces, are now sworn to the King. What else will follow?
Let's bring back the panel now, Dr. Carolyn Harris, Richard Berthelsen, and Nathan Tidridge. And where does this tradition of having subsequent monarchs face opposite sides of the coin come from?
Well, it's interesting that historically that the image of the monarch on the coinage for some of the very early monarchs, this is often the earliest portraiture that we have. So we see members of the royal family putting a great deal of thought into how they are portrayed on the coinage. For Queen Elizabeth II in Canada, there were 4 different images over the course of her reign. So these images are updated every so often. So a lot of thought is put into these designs, as this is very much the public face of the monarch, and it's the face of the monarch that many people see every day.
How soon, Richard, do you expect to see a currency change? And there's obviously a cost that's associated with that, too.
Well, yes, there is. But, you know, the Queen's portraiture on banknotes and coins has been updated over the 70 years as well. In fact, the Queen actually appeared on our banknotes as a princess. So, you know, it is built into the way our coinage and money is dealt with, that there's an update to the sovereign's portrait. I think it's going to be an interesting decision for the government as to how they proceed. The Bank of Canada has suggested that the new King's portrait will be on the $20 bill, which is, I believe, the only place on our printed money that the Queen is presently. The coinage we'll see in the future. And of course, the government here will want to, if they're going to continue that tradition, they're going to want to ensure that it's a Canadian effigy. In other words, the effigies that are on our coins and money are Canadian portraiture in the last, 50 years, let's say. And so there's been a real effort to have a Canadian artist do that work. So it's going to be something we'll be looking for in the next little while, but it's going to take probably, I think, about a year for some of these changes to be fully felt. Oaths and other legal documents, those were changed as of last Thursday, last week.
What about all the places that are informally named the Queen's this or that, or the King's this or that? I know that the Queen's Plate, there's a tradition that it's named after whatever monarch there is, but they are having a board meeting. So what happens to all of that?
Well, in the case of the changing of names from queens to kings, it really depends on the place itself. Now, Queen's Park in Toronto was named for Queen Victoria, so it will not change to King's Park. So places named for specific monarchs stay as they are, but places that reference the sovereign in their capacity personifying the state, that does change. So we speak of legal documents, it'll be the Court of the King's Bench, citizenship oaths of loyalty to the king.
You know, it's not just royal symbols and the physical stuff that will change. There was a moment when King Charles, in his inaugural address, made reference to Meghan and Harry, and he said he wanted to express his love for them as they built their lives overseas. And many, it was short, it was poignant, but many interpreted it to be an olive branch. And so what does the change look like there for that relationship? Is that an olive branch that will sort of bridge a divided royal family?
I think we're going to see these moments of the royals standing shoulder to shoulder in the period of mourning, and they want to make sure they present a united front so that other stories and other issues don't get raised when we should really be paying tribute to the Queen and wishing a new king success with his reign.
All right, quick break. We'll be right back with more from our panel.
And stick around after the show for a brand new documentary film featuring exclusive home movies shot by the British royal family. It's called Elizabeth, the Unseen Queen, coming up at 10 p.m. on Vision. Welcome back. The modern Commonwealth and Queen Elizabeth grew up together. She made the Commonwealth her priority, and under her leadership, it grew from 8 members to 54 today.
Now, as Charles III ascends the throne, could things begin to change? And I would just add to that, Richard, so much of what is holding the Commonwealth together is historical and sentimental, but sentiments can wither away. And what happens when the person that's responsible for those sentiments, or is at least holding them together, is now gone? I mean, the question becomes, is the Commonwealth at risk?
Well, there's no doubt the Commonwealth has lost its biggest supporter, its biggest friend, the glue that's held it together for, 70 years through some very, very tricky times. I mean, Commonwealth issues used to be right at the forefront of the news around the former Rhodesia, which transitioned to Zimbabwe, and around South Africa. And these almost ripped the Commonwealth apart at the time. Now there's new issues facing the Commonwealth, not least of which is the legacy of the colonial era prior to there even being a Commonwealth back from the era of empire. But let's remember, the new king has also spent about 50 years committing himself to the Commonwealth and is incredibly well-traveled, well-known to the leaders, and those leaders chose to make him the head of the Commonwealth following the death of the Queen. So he has a big road to go down, but the biggest challenges for him in that regard is the legacy of empire, the legacy of colonialism, and that is going to be the challenge. And I think that with a new reign, with a new thinking on this issue, I would expect it is something that might be addressed more directly than it has been in the past in the coming years.
Carolyn, what's your view of the way Charles would approach those very tough issues of the British role in slavery and colonialism?
I think that we have seen King Charles III as Prince of Wales speak very frankly about some of these very difficult chapters of British imperial history. Last year in Barbados, when he was there for Barbados's transition from constitutional monarchy to republic within the Commonwealth, he spoke quite forcefully on the atrocity of slavery. And William and Catherine, now the Prince and Princess of Wales, also condemned that history of slavery on their Caribbean tour. More recently in Canada, the Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, emphasized that he was there to listen to Canadians, particularly Indigenous peoples, and he acknowledged the pain that had been caused by the residential school system. So we're seeing in the recent years, the new king has spoken about these issues, and it's following the trend set by Queen Elizabeth II when she was in Ireland in 2011. She gave a speech partly in Gaelic, stating how there were things that could have and should have been done differently in Britain's relationship with Ireland. So none of these are formal apologies, but they are acknowledgments of some of these terrible chapters in British imperial history.
Nathan, there are the Commonwealth nations, and then there are the countries where the king is now head of state. And so for those that were maybe thinking about it before but never did because the queen was so beloved, now may be their opportunity. Will we see more of these countries potentially take steps to become republics?
I think there's a possibility of that. It depends on the different nations of which the king is head and the history of the crown in that particular nation. We have to remember that those nations have chosen to be constitutional monarchies. All of them did at independence. They're fully independent nations, and having the crown there by no means shows some allegiance to Britain or empire or anything like that. They chose in their form of independence, as Canada did, that they wanted to have a monarchy as part of their society. And so we have to kind of take into account the history, the perspective of those different countries of the crown and how the crown operates in that society.
On the other hand, you know, there are new members of the Commonwealth. Do you see a possibility for it expanding, Richard?
Well, the Commonwealth has expanded. It's extraordinary. We now have 3 or 4 countries that really were never part of the former empire. It really didn't have a direct relationship with the United Kingdom. So it is possible that it will. I mean, there's a lot of countries that see this as a valuable institution to engage with other countries, particularly large donor countries for aid like the United Kingdom or Australia, New Zealand, possibly Canada. So it's been a very surprising development. It's difficult to imagine there's very many more countries out there that want to join, but it is possible. And again, I think it's going to depend how the Commonwealth continues to evolve and how it reckons with the entities that existed prior to the establishment of the modern Commonwealth as a free association of nations, which really speak with consensus. This is not a voting organization like the UN is or something like that. This is an organization that works through consensus. And so that sometimes makes change and action a little more challenging.
Well, and Carolyn, do you get any sense that the king will not pursue his mother's vision for the Commonwealth?
Well, I think that one of the challenges that's going to unfold in the coming years is there are fewer working members of the royal family. There's King Charles III and Queen Camilla. There are William and Catherine, the new Prince and Princess of Wales. There's Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and Edward and Sophie, the Earl and Countess of Wessex. So that's 7 working members of the royal family. The Queen, in the early years of her reign, spent months at a time traveling around the Commonwealth. She undertook a very long tour in 1953, 1954, traveling to Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific, the Caribbean. In 1959, she spent 5 days traveling across Canada by train. And I think the days of those big whistle stop tours or these very long multi-country tours have come to an end. We're going to see shorter targeted royal tours. So the Queen became a very well-known, familiar figure in the various Commonwealth realms and the Commonwealth republics as well. Whereas I think going forward, we may see shorter royal tours and that trend towards video conferencing royal events that the Queen so embraced during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that will continue with a smaller core group of working members of the royal family.
All right, Carolyn, can I just say you have an encyclopedic memory of British history. All right, a big thank you to our panel. Thank you for your time.
And coming up, part 2 of my interview with former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. That's next.
Welcome back to theZoomer.
Here's part 2 of my interview with former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, who had a special relationship with the Queen. You were one of only 4 Canadians to receive the Order of Merit, which is the only order that the monarch chose by herself. And you could only have 24 living people at a time. Tell me about that. What was your reaction to receiving that?
But I was surprised and very honored that she put my name there. There are not many politicians there. There is a scientists and Nobel Prize and so on from other parts of the Commonwealth, but mostly from Great Britain because they live there. And, I accept that with pleasure and a bit of humility. And every 12 months or 15 months, we will go to one of their castle where she would have a ceremony. We went to Windsor, we went to where they proclaimed the King this morning, St. James, and Buckingham Palace, having this meeting, very often beginning with a mass. I was sitting next to her or to Prince Philip many times at these meetings. And of course, the last time that Prince Philip I met was is the day that he proclaimed he was to stop working. He didn't want to keep going, He said to me, I had unveiled 25,000 plaques. That's enough. And it is the day he had proclaimed that he was not to do anything public anymore. And I had a lunch with him that day, discussing what was going on in the United States and Great Britain and in Canada, but we had a good discussion about Mr. Trump. It was kind of interesting to know his views.
The new king, Charles III, has been proclaimed, and for a lot of people, that's making this real. What differences do you see coming?
But he is in a very difficult position. He was, the king to be for 50 years. When he was after 21, the Queen was the Queen at 25 or 26. So it was a very difficult situation. And of course, the press today are more intruding than they used to be. So he had some problem with his private life. But he has shown an ability to get involved in issues like in the environment and education for the poor that have been noticed. Of course, he made some statements at times that were a bit controversial. Now he will have to be careful, but I think he will do it. He has been trained for that and is ready to do the job properly. Of course, the monarchy, as always, is less of an important institution than it was 100 years ago. So he has to manage it the best of his abilities. And I think he will do all right.
Do you think that his accession will accelerate the move in a lot of countries to get rid of the monarchy?
I don't know. There was an attempt to do that in Australia, and there was a referendum on that, and they not succeed. New Zealand had, it was a political debate, Bolger, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, when I was there, was known to be anti-monarchist. I remember when the subject came at a dinner when he was there and I was there in the Queen. So it was kind of awkward position when the subject occurred, caused by Lech Walesa, who was the president of Poland. And anyway, it will come back, but in Canada, the difficulty, if people want to do that, you need the consent of all the provinces to do that under the Constitution. So if it is a marginal push, it will not succeed because I know the negotiation between the provinces and the federal government, and there will be one of the provincial premier who will want to bargain and votes for money. And, I've been around the table for many, many years. So, but, institution evolve, and I think that Canada will not be one of the first to do it.
Your final thoughts on this passing?
In my traveling, the two personalities that attracted the same respect was the Queen and Nelson Mandela. When they were there, you did not exist as prime minister and so on. People did not pay attention to us. They were just concentrating their attention on the Queen or Nelson Mandela because they were people of one kind only, very rare to have personalities who attracted so much respect. And I'm lucky to have lived a lot of a happy moment with the Queen. And it's too bad she gone, but 70 years of service, will not be matched again, ever, by anybody, I guess.
Monsieur Chrétien, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Merci beaucoup. À la prochaine.
Well, that's it for time. The death of Queen Elizabeth II brings to an end an era. And though there were some bumps along the road, she pursued her role with dignity and humility and was a constant, unchanging presence in a changing world.
She was able to manage change while clinging to tradition, and the question is, will her heirs be able to do the same? This concludes our special coverage for this evening. Stay tuned after the show for a brand new documentary film featuring home movies shot by the British royal family. It's called Elizabeth, the Unseen Queen, coming up right after the commercial break on Vision. Thank you for being with us.
For now, it's time to zoom out.